Trash. Like you did. You really think walking in here made you my equal? Turner snarled, the gun barrel pressed hard against Maya's forehead, his eyes bloodshot with contempt. The crowd recoiled, yet phones stayed raised, capturing every word he spat like blades. Maya stared him down, ice cold. You just made yourself the weakest man in this room. The air froze her reply, choking Turner into silence under the gaze of dozens. In broad daylight, the supermarket was packed, the fruit shelves glowing with shades of orange, red, and green, but all of it was swallowed by the chill of a pitch-black gun. The crowd, jammed between aisles, the clatter of shopping carts bumping into each other, suddenly froze. Every eye locked on a single point where Officer Blake Turner stood blocking the exit. His bloodshot eyes and snarling voice pressed the entire space into silence. It was no longer a supermarket, but a suffocating auditorium where fear hung heavy. Maya Johnson, short hair, neat posture, upright, moved without haste like any ordinary shopper. Yet her steps halted the instant the barrel pointed at her. Turner growled, each word landing like a boulder. "Stop right there. You think you can fool me that easily? I saw everything. You stole something, didn't you?" People nearby trembled. A few phones rose, eyes wide, with a mix of fear and fury. Maya didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't beg. She simply stood, her deep black eyes locked onto his, as if exposing the arrogance he tried to hide beneath the uniform. That silence unsettled Turner even more. He took a sharp breath, pulled the gun, raised it to eye level, and barked, "Don't move, you know the law." The click of the chamber echoed, slicing through the air. A child's laughter near the candy aisle fell dead quiet, and the ad music turned meaningless. The entire store held its breath. Maya didn't budge, shoulders squared, face calm. She wasn't trying to prove anything. Her calm was a quiet declaration of strength Turner couldn't touch. An elderly woman nearby gently dropped her basket of oranges, and one rolled across the tile, bumping into a young man's foot. He bent to pick it up, then froze, seeing how close the barrel was to Maya's forehead. Shaky phones kept filming. No one dared speak, but in their eyes a single question burned. How could a police officer humiliate a woman so publicly? Turner tilted his head, a crooked grin forming. "What are you staring at?" I asked. "What did you steal from that bag? Answer quickly before I slam you to the floor." His voice roared and hissed like a beast drunk on the power in his grip. Maya didn't blink, her voice low and steady. "You're making a serious mistake. Just 5 words yet." They dropped like a stone. The crowd shivered. Whispers broke out, glances exchanged, like truth had just been uncovered. Turner snorted, his eyes flashing with a flicker of doubt. He masked by shoving the gun closer, so close the metal gleamed on Maya's cheekbone. He snarled, "A serious mistake. I am the law here. The only mistake is that you think you can talk back to me." Maya tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. For a moment, her calm seemed to give the witnesses a sliver of courage. A teenage boy whispered to his friend, "She's not afraid." The friend, trembling, replied, "But what if he pulls the trigger?" The air was tight like a string about to snap. Turner stepped closer, voice venomous. "You think your skin color or that smug attitude will save you? I've seen your kindness 100 times. They all bow their heads, only you dare to lift yours." He punched each word, trying to force Maya into a corner. But it was that very calm, no yelling, no fear, that drove Turner to the edge. Maya lowered her voice, but each word rang clear in the frozen silence. "The more you speak, the more you prove you've lost all trace of human dignity." Her words cut like a blade, stabbing into the void Turner tried to hide. The crowd couldn't hold back anymore. Whispers rose, glances were sharp with contempt. Turner inhaled hard, his finger tight on the trigger, veins bulging across the back of his hand. A mother clutched her child, pulling back toward the shelves, eyes locked on the scene. An old man muttered, "Dear God, he's lost it." And while fear gripped the crowd, Maya stood like a pillar, upright and unshaken, her eyes glowing with defiance. Turner nearly snapped, hissing, "You think you're special. You're nothing here." His voice cracked like a curse, but flickering in his eyes betrayed his panic. Maya stayed silent for a beat, then answered flatly, "You'll remember this moment not because of me, but but because you buried your own career with your own hands. The hum of the air conditioner, the rattle of a shaky shopping cart passed by, but everything else faded. The gun still hovered close, and Maya's calm stare held the weight of a trial. Phones were no longer hidden, but raised openly, tiny red lights blinking, recording every word, every insult, every second. Maya knew nothing that happened here would disappear. It would echo beyond the supermarket's doors, past the concrete walls beyond the city. Still, she didn't flinch. She chose to face it, to let Turner turn himself into the clearest image of abuse of power. Turner growled, voice heavy as lead. "You'll pay for this right here." The gun shook slightly in his hand, whether from rage or from the burn of dozens of eyes drilling into him. Maya breathed steadily, her heart, unhurried lips tight, ready for whatever came next. In that moment, the supermarket was no longer a place for buying and selling. It became a battlefield of pride and unchecked authority. The crowd held its breath, some wanting to scream but choking on the urge. The air was thick. Even the hiss from the cold shelf sounded like a threat. In the middle of it all, Maya stood still as if the gun were nothing more than a meaningless piece of metal. Her words, repeated once more, brought the moment of tension to a close. "You're making a serious mistake." The neon lights on the supermarket ceiling cast a pale, cold glow over the entire space. The once noisy aisle, filled with rolling carts and chatter, now held only tension. Officer Blake Turner stood in the center, his gun still pointed squarely at Maya Johnson. Her silence drove him to the edge, lips curling as he shouted to drown his own uncertainty. "Don't think your skin color will save you. A thief is still a criminal." The words sliced through the air like a blade, exposing the contempt he had long carried. The sound echoed down the aisle, hit in every ear, making several people step back. An elderly woman clutched her basket of vegetables, hands shaken so badly the produce fell to the floor, and she didn't bother to pick it up. A teenage boy, holding a soda can, quickly set it back on the shelf, eyes wide. Whispering, rose, then vanished, just as fast as everyone looked at one another silently, agreeing they wouldn't interfere. Fear blanketed the moment, the dread that any action could trigger disaster, with the gun still in Turner's grip. In that silence, Maya didn't flinch or look away. She stared straight at Turner, her voice calm but firm, each word hitting the tile floor like a dropped stone. "I don't need my skin color to prove my honor." The answer was short, without a hint of pleading or fear. It was sharp enough to make the crowd flinch, a few people swallowing hard, realizing that her calm held more power than the weapon aimed at her head. Turner froze for a second, hesitation flickering in his eyes, but then he clenched his jaw, forcing a crooked smile. "Honor," he repeated, voice dripping with scorn, each syllable like acid on stone. "You've got nothing but a cheap wallet." He tried to diminish her, not just with insults, but by making her presence seem worthless in front of dozens of watching eyes. A few gasps rose. Some women covered their mouths, shocked that a police officer could say such things out loud. A middle-aged man shook his head, muttering, "This is too much." But no one stepped forward. No one dared face Turner while the gun was in his hand. That silence became an unspoken shield for his abuse of power. Maya remained still, unmoved, her eyes cutting through the mask Turner wore. He thought his words would crush her, but they only made her stand taller, her shoulders stiffening like steel. Her answer had yet to come, but her presence spoke for her. Those standing close felt they were witnessing more than a confrontation. They were watching two worlds collide, the blind arrogance of abuse and the unwavering strength of dignity. Turner glanced around and spotted several phones pointed at him. The tiny red lights at the corner of the screen signaled they were recording. That only made him angrier. He shouted louder, each word dropping like a hammer. "You think I'm afraid of being filmed? That cheap little camera won't save you." His roar made some hands tremble. A few phones lowered, but others stayed locked in place, their holders aware that every second captured might matter later. In his fury, Turner didn't realize that the louder he yelled, the more his true nature showed. The whispers among the crowd rose again, no longer just fear, but outrage and contempt for the way a police officer assumed the right to publicly humiliate someone because of his bias. A young man leaned toward his friend and said, "He's not a cop anymore. He's an armed thug." The friend nodded, eyes fixed on the scene. Maya stayed silent for a moment, her gaze steady, but never soft. When Turner finished, she spoke, her voice low yet louder than any of his screams. "You can point your gun, you can insult me, but everything you just said proves that you're the one who's lost all honor." Her words cut clean sharp as a blade, leaving Turner speechless. He opened his mouth to strike back, but in that brief pause, the crowd sensed the shift in momentum. There was a faint clap, hesitant, then silence again, as if the person who clapped instantly realized the danger. But even the small gesture was enough to push Turner further. He whipped around toward the crowd, shouting, "Who clapped? Who dares take her side?" No one answered. Only unblinking stares met his glare. No one looked away. No one bowed their head. Turner hissed and turned back, shoving the gun even closer to Maya, as if the quiet resistance around him was sending him over the edge. Maya didn't move, her voice calm. "You're digging your own grave. Every word you speak is evidence." Turner growled, sweat now streaking across his forehead, the hand holding the gun slightly trembling. He felt surrounded, not by people, but by truth closing in. In that moment, the supermarket was no longer a place for groceries. It became a stage where society watched a battle unfold between violent authority and proud dignity. Maya didn't need many words. Through her gaze and her calm reply, she turned Turner from the man in control to the man exposed. And that exposure would be the spark that ignited the storm beyond, where the video kept rolling and where the public would not forgive. No one in the supermarket knew exactly what would happen next, but everyone felt one thing clearly. The line had been crossed, and this public humiliation was no longer just between two individuals, but had become a shared wound for the entire community. Maya still stood, her eyes burning like fire, while Turner, though still holding the gun, was slowly losing the one thing he had always relied on: the fear of others. The supermarket fell completely silent, the neon lights casting their cold green hue across the space, with only the distant beep of a barcode scanner echoing from the checkout counter, flat and out of place in the stifling air. The crowd held its breath, eyes wide open, as if everyone sensed the next moment would decide the fate of the woman standing before the gun. Turner, face flushed, red veins bulging in his neck, breathing in angry bursts, forced himself closer, the gun still pressed hard against Maya's temple. He believed he had her cornered, that she would be scared, trembling, begging. But Maya stood tall, her gaze calm and cold, her breath steady as if the gun didn't exist. Then, in the thick silence, she slowly reached into her jacket pocket, each movement deliberate, clear, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Turner flinched and barked, his voice cracking like thunder. "Don't try anything. What are you pulling out? Food stamps? Hand it over." His mouth curled into a sneer, eyes flickering with satisfaction. In Turner's mind, the script was perfect. He'd yank that card into the air, expose her inferiority in front of everyone, turn her into a public joke. But Maya didn't respond. Her hand moved with calm precision, pulling out a dark leather wallet. Nothing flashy, worn to the point some in the crowd mistook it for worthless. She opened it cleanly, without hesitation. A glint of light flashed beneath the ceiling, reflected off a card neatly placed inside. She took it out and held it up right in Turner's line of sight. The military ID gleamed, embossed letters, crystal clear, U.S. Army. Colonel Maya Johnson. For a split second, the room seemed to explode. Whispers burst into the air, first sharp intakes of breath, disbelieving murmurs. Then, like a wave, the whispers grew too loud to contain. "She's a high-ranking officer," a man said aloud. A woman followed colonel rank. Turner froze, eyes wide, the sneer frozen on his face. He stared at the card, the metallic shine reflecting straight into his eyes like a blade. For a moment, the hand holding the gun trembled. He quickly tightened his grip to hide it. The truth had hit too hard, too fast. No one in the crowd could have guessed it, and even Turner hadn't imagined that the woman he humiliated and accused of stealing, held military authority ranked high enough to demand his respect. A middle-aged man in the crowd suddenly spoke out, "She's a colonel, a high-ranking officer," and he pointed a gun at her. His voice trembled, but it was heavy with fury. That sentence lit a spark, igniting the tension that had been building. People started talking louder, and more phones rose into the air, zooming in on the gleaming card. Red recording lights blinked everywhere like unblinking eyes, capturing every detail, every expression, every bead of sweat rolling down Turner's temple. Maya didn't raise her voice. She simply held her ground, calmly displaying the card for all to see. Her eyes stayed locked on Turner, not in defiance, but to force him to face himself. She didn't need more words. That single card was enough to flip the entire balance of power. Turner clenched his teeth, breathing hard, trying to claw back control. "Rank. What does rank mean here?" he shouted, voice sharp but cracking the certainty gone. "This is my city. Here I am, the law." The words rang out, but they had lost their weight. The crowd responded not with whispers, but with outrage. "He's lost it. He just insulted a military colonel." A young woman near the shelf whispered to her friend. "She's standing tall, not even shaken. I've never seen anyone stay that calm." The friend replied, eyes still fixed ahead, "Because she's seen war. He hides behind a badge." The atmosphere shifted. Turner realized the crowd no longer feared him. Their stares had changed, no longer timid, but full of contempt and anger. It made him more reckless. He growled, shoved the gun closer metal, pressing against Maya's skin. "Colonel or not, you kneel when I give the order. You hear me?" Maya raised her head, her voice deep and clear, ringing out like a bell against the supermarket walls. "You just pointed a gun at an officer who's led thousands of soldiers. You will answer for this, not just to me, but to this entire country." The murmurs turned into shouts. "Put the gun down. Drop it." A few claps broke out, hesitant at first, then spreading like a wave. Turner looked around and saw he was no longer protected by silence. He was surrounded by outrage. Phones kept recording. Eyes stayed locked, and at the center of it all stood Maya, unshaken, a colonel in uniform, facing down an abusive officer's gun without flinching. This unexpected reversal had turned Turner from the one in command into the one collapsing under pressure, a man undone by his own arrogance and ignorance. The supermarket erupted not from gunfire, but from the truth laid bare. And in that rising noise, Turner felt for the first time that the gun in his hand was heavy as if chained. Maya, holding the gleaming ID, had made it clear to the packed room that real honor doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs to be seen. In front of the packed crowd, crammed into the narrow supermarket aisle, the cold barrel of the gun was still pressed against Maya's temple, while the military ID in her hand caught the harsh neon light, casting a sharp gleam that made the scene look like a tense painting framed in real life. No one dared to move. The voices that had exploded earlier now fell completely silent, as if everyone were waiting for a verdict. Maya stood tall, unwavering, her eyes radiating a strange steadiness. Her voice rang out clear and steady without the slightest tremble. "You just pointed a gun at an officer who once commanded thousands of soldiers." One sentence, but enough to shake the entire room. It landed like a bomb in the crowd, a statement meant not just for Turner, but for everyone watching, reminding them that the line had been crossed and this was no longer a private matter. At the far end of the aisle, a man who had been clutching a basket full of oranges suddenly shouted, his voice hoarse from shaking but unexpectedly loud. "Put the gun down." That sentence was like a spark dropping into an overfilled powder keg. Immediately, other voices followed, scattered at first, then rising in number and strength. "Put the gun down. Put the gun down." The wave of shouting swept through the store like a storm, shaking the glass windows and turning both Turner and Maya into the center of a growing circle. People were no longer holding their breath. They were letting their anger break loose, no longer hiding their outrage at such blatant abuse of power. Turner spun to both sides, his eyes, bloodshot veins pulsing his face, flushed and ready to explode. But instead of retreating, he let out a dry, broken laugh echoing through the thick air. Not with confidence, but like someone desperate to hold on. "Your army means nothing here. This is my city." He emphasized each word, clinging to the last threads of authority. But his repeated use of the words, "my city," only exposed the panic and disorder inside him. People in the crowd exchanged looks, not with fear now, but with growing contempt. A middle-aged man shook his head and muttered bitterly, "He's turning himself into a joke." Maya remained motionless, eyes steady. The card in her hand shone like irrefutable evidence, a sharp tear through the mask Turner had tried to wear. Her voice was even and ice-cold. "This mistake will destroy your career." It didn't sound like a threat. It was a sentence dropped straight into Turner's crumbling pride. For a moment, the crowd fell completely silent. Then every gaze snapped to him, sharp and searing, full of judgment. That silence was heavier than the chance before because it meant no one feared him anymore. They only saw a man sinking into disgrace. Turner's hand trembled as he gripped the gun tighter, trying to hide his unraveling. Sweat streamed down his face, falling in drops onto the polished tile floor. Each drop ticked like a clock, counting down to the moment he would lose everything. He could feel the shift in the crowd's eyes. What was once fear had turned to disgust, then to rage. The shouting swelled again, rising louder than any excuse he could offer. "Drop the gun, drop the gun." The chant rolled like waves, unstoppable, pushing Turner to the edge. Maya stood firm, her calm presence making Turner's aggression look ridiculous. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to prove anything. She only had to stand there. The people raised their phones higher now, no longer hesitant, determined to record every second and show the world what was happening. Each phone was an eye, and Turner knew he was surrounded by dozens of lenses. He forced a sneer and shouted, "Keep filming. Go ahead. You think those clips will save her? No one cares." But his voice cracked bitter and weightless. Just as he finished, a middle-aged woman near the dairy section screamed, "He's already lost." Her voice lit the crowd into an uproar, shouts erupting across the store. A young man yelled, "You're done. I swear you'll lose your job." No one held back anymore. The fear had vanished, replaced by blazing fury. Turner spun around, jamming the gun tighter against Maya's temple, as if trying to prove he still held power. He shouted, "You think that card will save you? I make the law here." Maya's lips curved slightly, her eyes sharp as blades. Her voice was low and clear. "You are not the law. You're an abuser, and the whole country will see it." Her words cut through the noise, not just exposing Turner's crumbling mask, but declaring to everyone that this wasn't personal, it was about justice. The crowd roared back, dropped the gun, louder than ever, their voices crashing through the space. Turner turned to face them, eyes bloodshot, his rage collapsing into a growl of desperation. He screamed, his voice ragged and wild like a cornered animal. "This is my city." But the moment the words left his mouth, the crowd's roar drowned him out, louder and fiercer. That weak declaration only confirmed what was already clear. His fake power had been stripped away, and all that remained was a cop unraveling in the center of public outrage. Maya stood still, her eyes glowing, needing no movement to hold the crowd steady. She stood like a mirror, reflecting one simple truth here. Honor was the real power, and abuse was only a fleeting illusion. The supermarket had now turned into an impromptu courtroom where Turner was being judged by dozens of people, by the recording phones, and by one officer standing tall without flinching. In that courtroom, Maya had won without firing a single bullet, while Turner was losing to no one but himself. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the far end of the aisle at first, just a few thuds, but quickly growing louder, steady, and urgent like the beat of a war drum signaling an approaching formation. The chants of "drop the gun" from the crowd seemed to collapse in an instant, replaced by a tense silence filled with anticipation. Heads turned, eyes lit with a mix of surprise and hope. From the end of the aisle, two military police officers emerged, their strides, firm shoulders, squared eyes, eyes cold as steel. Their faces were unreadable, and without saying a word, they tore through the thick air like blades carrying the weight of military order and authority. As they closed in, one of them spoke, his voice booming and sharp enough to make hearts seize. "Put the gun down, now." Each word slammed down like a hammer echoing across the supermarket walls, silencing everyone nearby. The command wasn't just for Turner, it brought the entire crowd into sync, a clear reminder that this was no longer a personal dispute. It had become a standoff between an abuser of power and an institution watching closely. Blake Turner froze his hand, tightening around the gun, trembling. He blinked rapidly, pupils flaring for a brief second before forcing his face into a hard, rigid mask. Sweat streamed down both temples, slipping into his collar, making his skin itch and burn. He inhaled deeply, trying to hold on to a composed expression to keep his breath from revealing panic. But hesitation can't be hidden. His eyes betrayed the spiral. In front of him stood Maya Johnson, unmoved like a monument, her gaze razor-sharp and locked on him, the military ID still gleaming in her hand. Behind him was a furious crowd, their chants for him to lower the gun piling into an unstoppable pressure. In a split-second glance toward the crowd, Turner saw rows of phones raised high, tiny red lights blinking like a wall of watching eyes. Each light felt like a suspended sentence, a warning that everything happening today would live far beyond this moment across screens, headlines, and broadcasts. He could scream at the crowd, could pretend he was the law in this space, but he couldn't beat the footage, capturing every second. After a stunned pause, the crowd erupted again, this time not only with anger, but with exhilaration. They shouted louder, cheering for the military police, pouring strength into Maya. The chant returned, rolling in waves. "Drop the gun! Drop the gun!" The roars thundered, drowning out any defense Turner could offer. The atmosphere had tightened so much that even a single wrong move could trigger disaster. Maya remained still, her back straight, both feet planted firmly on the tile floor, her figure like a monument of defiance. Her eyes locked onto Turner, unwavering, and the intensity in her gaze made even the bystanders shiver. She didn't need to yell, didn't need to move forward, just standing there was enough to force Turner back. In her eyes was the sharpness of a blade and the steadiness of a soldier who had already crossed the line between life and death. The two military police stepped closer, their boots pounding like a series of warnings. One of them repeated the order, his voice tight but forceful. "Put it down before you regret it." Turner flinched, his finger trembling on the trigger. He realized he was trapped between forces. Maya's unyielding stare in front of him, the fury of the crowd behind him, and the authority of the military closing in at his side. A man used to overpowering others with violence now found himself cornered, pressured from all sides with no way out. Images flashed through Turner's mind, his superior's furious face, headlines and bold red video clips spreading online with millions of angry comments. He saw his career crumbling, his future buried, all because of this one moment of arrogance and rage. He took a deep breath, trying to swallow his fear, but the more he tried, the tighter it felt, like an invisible rope wrapping around his neck. A man in the crowd shouted, "He's scared, look at him!" The people nearby erupted in agreement, turning the words into a wave of mocking laughter and scorn. Turner clenched his jaw veins, bulging at his neck, struggling to hold on to what little authority he had left, but that tension only made his fear more visible. He snarled, voice cracking with desperation, "Don't think the military means you've won," but his words were drowned in the sea of shouts. Maya looked straight at him, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the noise with ease. "You've already lost, Turner." The sentence was brief, not loud, but it landed like a final judgment. Turner jolted his eyes, flickering the hand holding the gun, now shaking uncontrollably. The crowd exploded with cheers, their voices pounding through the air so loud it felt like the tiles beneath them might shake. Turner looked around, his eyes lost and panicked. In the eyes of every citizen he saw contempt and resolve. No one would let him walk away. The phones were still pointed at him, each frame capturing evidence he couldn't erase. Those images pierced through him, sweat pouring faster faster, his grip weaker. Meanwhile, Maya stood tall, unshaken. Her eyes were sharp as blades, the military ID in her hand still glinting under the lights like a mark of truth that couldn't be denied. She didn't need to do anything more. Her presence alone had reduced Turner to something small, someone crushed under the weight of justice and truth. The moment stretched endlessly as Turner kept forcing himself to hold the gun, but everyone could see the truth he had lost. Lost to the crowd, lost to Maya's unshakable calm, lost to the steady boots of the military police, and lost to the fear within himself. Amid all the chaos, Maya Johnson stood firm, not stepping back even once, her eyes sharp as blades burning an image into everyone's memory. She had proven that honor could remain standing even with a gun pressed to her forehead. In the cramped dorm room, the blue light from a computer screen and several phones lit up the faces of a group of young students. The fan spun with a soft clatter. A light breeze stirred the thin curtain by the window, but no one noticed. All eyes were locked on the bright screen glowing on the desk. A skinny student hunched into his chair, hands trembling as he held his phone. The clip, just under a minute long, had just been shared. The footage was shaky, but the central moment was terrifyingly clear. Officer Blake Turner, with a gun pressed to the temple of a black woman, the cold weapon lit by harsh neon light, the tension on full display. In frame, Maya Johnson stood tall, still, her eyes frozen in place as if she could stop time. Another student sitting nearby couldn't hold it in and burst out, "My God, he did that in a crowded supermarket." His voice shook, then hardened into anger. The video kept playing, capturing shouts of "drop the gun" from the crowd. The sound was chaotic, but the danger Turner had created was unmistakable. The room fell silent for a few seconds until the first wave of comments popped up on the screen. The hashtag #WrongWoman appeared instantly, reshared at lightning speed. Then came another Army colonel. The glowing words scrolled across the screen like sparks catching dry grass, setting off a digital firestorm. Out in the hallway, more students overheard the noise and rushed in. Every eye was glued to the clip. A curly-haired girl leaning against the doorframe stared wide-eyed and whispered, "She's a colonel, right? It's written clearly on the card." Someone nodded, hand tight on the mouse, scrolling nonstop through the flood of social media posts. "He just disrespected the military," one comment read, paired with a screenshot from the video. The bold words were quickly liked, shared, and echoed by dozens, then hundreds. In just minutes, the short clip had racked up hundreds of thousands of views, the count jumping by the second. The air in the dorm room felt charged. One student slammed his palm on the desk and shouted, "What kind of cop pulls a gun on a high-ranking officer? Who does he think he is?" His voice carried down the hallway, drawing even more people in. The once cramped room was now packed. Screen light flickered across faces full of outrage. Their eyes lit up like fire had caught in them. Each new comment that appeared was like fuel to the blaze, feeding the fury, growing by the minute. Outside the dorms, in a corner cafe, a few young people were glued to their phones replaying the newly shared clip. A man in a white t-shirt growled, "What a disgrace." He disrespected the military and the entire black community. His friend across the table nodded, slamming his mug down. If that video didn't exist, he would have walked free. Not now. Each sentence cut through the cramped space, blending with the loud background music, though everyone's attention was clearly locked on the screen replaying that tense scene. Within hours, the video hit 1 million views. The number rose so fast it made people gasp. On social media, Turner's raised gun and Maya's calm stare became two opposing symbols. On one side, violent abuse of power. On the other, dignity and composure. Posts under the hashtags #WrongWoman and "Arma Colonel" flooded every feed, bringing in thousands of comments. One person wrote, "He didn't just humiliate a woman, he humiliated the military." Another was harsher. "If he's not fired immediately, this whole system is rotten." In student forums, the topic took over. Screenshots spread everywhere, everywhere, and edited clips mocking Turner were shared repeatedly. One widely circulated meme showed Maya with her head held high, her steady gaze under bold text that read, "The biggest mistake of your life." People laughed, but it wasn't joyful, it was bitter, a way to vent rising outrage. In another dorm room, a group of female students sat around a laptop. They replayed the moment Turner was drowned out by chants from the crowd, the cries of "drop the gun," louder than anything he said. One girl bit her lip and whispered, "This isn't just someone's story anymore. This is a lesson for all of us." The others nodded, eyes flashing with solidarity. The room no longer felt like a place for gossip. It had turned into a quiet seminar on justice and power. High up in a downtown apartment, a group of veterans watched the clip too. A silver-haired man, eyes seasoned by time, exhaled heavily. "We bled to protect that flag, and today a cop pointed a gun at a colonel." He shook his head, his stare filled with fury. The man beside him, a younger, former officer, clenched his fist. "This video will spread far, and no one will be able to save him." As night fell, phone screens stayed lit everywhere. On sidewalks and fast food joints, on buses, people replayed the video and talked. Their voices blended into one rhythm: outrage, disgust, and a hunger for justice. Turner was no longer an anonymous officer. He had become the face of exposed abuse, while Maya, with her silence and proud stare, had become the new symbol of honorable strength. In the dorm room, where the first clip was shared, the students were still huddled together. The view count kept climbing from 1 million to 2, then 3. One student let out a bitter laugh. He just buried his own career. "The whole world won't forget this moment." Another added, "She stood tall, and that made all of us want to stand tall too." No one said anything else. They just looked at each other, eyes lit up, as if they had witnessed a new chapter of history unfolding through a tiny screen. The city's central square, usually buzzing with street music vendors and constant foot traffic, felt different that morning. All the usual noise was drowned out by the sound coming from a massive LED screen set up in the middle of the plaza. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on it, where the breaking news replayed in a loop beneath a bold red headline, "Police officer points gun at high-ranking black female officer." The image of Turner pressing the gun to Maya's temple was unmistakable, the dark barrel catching the neon glow, and her calm stare cutting like a blade into the pride of an entire system. Whispers broke out, first quiet, then growing into louder murmurs laced with horror and fury. A woman, standing close to the screen holding her young child, growled, "Is this what we pay taxes for?" A man beside her replied, his voice cracking with rage. He didn't just insult one person, he insulted the entire military. Each sentence poured fuel on the fire. The crowd thickened as people abandoned their jobs and daily routines to flood the square. From scattered conversations, small groups began raising signs printed in bold, "Justice needs no bad." The white banners stretched across the gray sky, the red letters bold as blood catching every eye. The square exploded into a spontaneous protest. Chants thundered in rhythm, joined by the street performers who had put down their instruments to beat hand drums in support. Justice need no badge. Justice need no badge. The words bounced off building walls and echoed between the high-rises, turning the air into a swirling storm. Workers in uniforms, mothers holding grocery bags, students with backpacks all stood as one, shouting the same demand, united beyond age or occupation. Among the crowd, a row of veterans stood shoulder to shoulder. Their eyes were steel faces lined with the years of old wars, but their voices were stronger than ever. One stepped forward and spoke with the force of a battle cry, "Touch her, and you touch all of us." The others echoed in unison, their voices steady and deep, every word a hammer striking hard. The crowd fell silent for a breath, then erupted in applause and cheers, their outrage rising like a tidal wave. The veterans raised a faded old flag, one they had carried through combat, now flying again in the heart of the city, a symbol of unity and honor. The heat spread fast, not just in the square, but across every surrounding street. Cars stopped mid-traffic. Drivers stepped out and joined the swelling crowd. Sidewalk cafes turned up the volume on their TVs so everyone could watch the news. On screen, the image of Maya holding her head high played on repeat, becoming a symbol of defiance. A young boy stared at the screen and asked his father, "Why isn't she afraid of the gun?" The father pulled him close and answered, "Because she knows honor is stronger than violence." Pressure reached the city police department. Outside the once sterile building, hundreds of people had gathered, crowding the steps, holding signs and shouting demands for action against Turner. "Fire him now. We want justice." The chants echoed through the glass windows and shook the concrete walls. Inside, young officers peeked out with pale faces, whispering to each other that Turner had dragged the entire system into collapse. The police chief entered the briefing room scowling, a fresh newspaper in hand. On the front page, the headline hit like a blow, gun to a colonel's head. "Nation erupts in outrage." The crowd outside showed no signs of stopping. With each passing hour, the number of protesters grew from hundreds to thousands. They sang rally songs, their voices mixing with drums and whistles setting the city ablaze like a fireball. No one saw it as a personal matter anymore. It had become a shared crisis where every citizen felt personally insulted. From balconies, families hung white sheets with "Justice Needs No" badge painted across them. The cloth whipped in the wind, turning the neighborhood into a sea of protest banners. International media joined in. Reporters packed the square, cameras sweeping in every direction, capturing the blaze of a city in revolt. Footage of Turner holding the gun played endlessly across global news channels alongside clips of citizens raising banners and veterans shouting slogans. The whole world was watching, and the weight bore down hard on the local government. Inside the police department, a closed-door meeting turned tense. Pens slammed on tables, papers thrown, voices raised in anger. A young officer shot up, voice shaken with fury. "We can't protect him anymore. He's turned the whole city against us." The room fell heavy. No one dared to defend Turner. The police chief lowered his head, knowing that without a swift decision, the department would be swept away by the storm roaring outside. The square remained lit by the LED screen, replaying the moment Turner pointed his gun alongside Maya's calm, unwavering gaze. Each time the footage appeared, the crowd roared louder, their chants drowning out even the reporters' voices. The scene carried on into the night, turning into a public festival of outrage. People didn't go home, they stayed, wanting to witness it, through wanting to see change happen right there. As the streetlights flicked on, hundreds of candles were lit. A sea of hands raised flames into the air, their soft glow reflecting off tense faces. In the darkness, the chant, "Justice Needs No" badge still rang out, louder than traffic, louder than the wind. And in that moment, everyone understood Turner was no longer a police officer. He had become the face of unchecked power laid bare, while Maya, though absent, had become the banner of honor and justice, her steady eyes and stance still radiating, fueling the storm sweeping the square. In a brightly lit TV studio, the air felt with tension. At the anchor desk, a well-known host sat upright, a stack of documents neatly arranged in front of her, but her eyes betrayed her frustration. Across from her sat a supermarket employee, his face still marked by the shock of the previous day's events. In the guest chair, his hands tightly clasped, he tried to steady himself, though his voice trembled as he began. "He humiliated her right in front of us," he said, eyes fixed on the camera as if speaking to the entire country. "He screamed insults, said her skin color couldn't save her, that honor was nothing more than a cheap wallet. We were all there, so many of us, but we were afraid of the gun. No one dared to step in." His words echoed through the studio, exposing the raw shame Turner had caused, confirming this was no misunderstanding but a truth seen and heard by many. The host nodded, her expression cold and sharp. She signaled to the technician, and the large screen behind her lit up. It was the supermarket security footage, crystal clear, showing everything. Viewers saw Turner blocking the aisle, gun raised to Maya Johnson's temple. Maya appeared calm, back straight, eyes sharp as ice, while Turner's face, flushed veins, bulged, shouting words too harsh to ignore. Every frame matched the witness account. No one in the studio spoke. The crew fell silent, letting the images speak for themselves. Finally, the host broke the silence, her voice low and steel-edged. "This is irrefutable evidence. What happened wasn't police procedure. It was abuse of power, plain and brutal." In the control room, the show's lead commentator stepped in, his tone firm, unflinching. "This isn't just discrimination. This is an insult to justice. When a police officer points a gun at a high-ranking military officer, that's not an isolated act. It reveals a sickness in the system where power becomes a whip used to strike at human dignity. And if we don't speak out, if we don't push back, then anyone could be the next Maya." His words rang out live across the country, quickly turning into a new rallying cry for millions listening. In homes, cafes, and dorm rooms, people tuned in to the broadcast. When the footage of Turner degrading Maya aired, many slammed tables in fury. A young mother burst into tears, pulling her child tighter while staring at Turner's cold glare. A group of workers, crowded into a small rented room, shouted, "Fire him! Get him out now!" Emotions surged, shifting from disbelief to anger, then rising into a wave of demand for justice. The television station continued bringing in more witnesses. A middle-aged woman, a cashier, recalled, "I clearly heard him say, 'I'm the law here.' At that moment, I felt my whole body tremble. But when Ms. Maya pulled out that military ID, I cried. I didn't cry out of fear, I cried out of pride." She stood tall, and he showed his true colors. Her heartfelt testimony moved the entire studio, and television viewers murmured in admiration. Immediately after the broadcast, social media exploded. Clips pulled from the security footage were shared everywhere, racking up millions of views within hours. Thousands of furious comments poured in, demanding that Turner be fired. "He just shot at the honor of the military," one comment read. "If he gets away with it today, any one of us could be the next target tomorrow." The outrage didn't stop at words, it turned into calls for action. The hashtag #FireTurner now appeared following the torrent of public anger. Major newspapers ran bold headlines on their front pages. One showed Maya standing tall with the caption beneath, "Honor does not kneel to a gun." Another declared nation erupts, demanding Turner's removal. On television, talk shows aired back-to-back with analysts and politicians voicing sharp criticism. One lawmaker declared, "If this system continues to tolerate abuse of power, then we no longer deserve to speak the word justice." The quote was clipped and shared widely, becoming a slogan echoed across thousands of posts. Inside the police department, the pressure hit like a hammer. Phones rang nonstop with hundreds of calls from journalists, advocacy groups, and high-ranking officials. The police chief sat in his office, his face heavy, sweat streaming, as he read the headlines flashing across the screen. Unprecedented wave of outrage. Young officers whispered among themselves, their eyes filled with resentment. He dragged all of us down with him. The atmosphere in the department thickened with tension. Everyone knew Turner had become a burden they could no longer carry. Meanwhile, out in the streets, the crowds grew larger by the hour. Signs reading, "Justice needs no badge," and "Fire Turner now," filled the avenues. Protesters held banners high, their chants drowning out the sound of traffic. A group of veterans raised their voices, repeating the line that had echoed in the square. "You come for her, you come for us." That declaration was now being broadcast on national television, reaching every home, every room. The air was boiling, the entire nation breathing in unison with rage. Turner, once an ordinary police officer, had become a cursed name everywhere. Maya, once the woman with the gun to her head, had now become a symbol of unyielding honor. The contrast was undeniable, and everyone understood that the moment had come. There was no more room for tolerance. That evening's news broadcast ended with footage of thousands marching, holding bright candles in their hands. The anchor concluded, "The people have spoken, now justice must respond." The entire country was in an uproar demanding Turner's immediate removal, and the event had officially gone beyond the control of one city. It had become a national story, where justice was no longer a distant concept but an urgent demand rising from every voice of the people. Inside the wide but stifling conference room of the police department, the air was so thick that everyone felt short of breath. On the long wooden table, files were stacked high, the fluorescent lights casting down on tense faces. The police chief sat at the head of the table, back straight but eyes revealing fatigue. He had barely picked up the report before a flood of questions hit him. "How do you plan to respond to the public?" An older officer asked, his voice dry. Another jumped in, barely keeping formality. "The media is shaking the entire country. Do you have a plan? They're naming Turner, but we're the ones carrying the fallout." Voices overlapped, loud and soft, all heavy with anger and despair. The chief slammed his pen on the table, but the sound wasn't enough to quiet the room. Every officer seated around the table wore a look of unease. Some avoided eye contact, some stared straight ahead, but all knew the situation had spun out of control. Turner was no longer a personal issue. He had dragged the entire department into a storm of public outrage that no one wanted to bear. The videos spreading online, the protests in the square, all pointed their blame in one direction, them. A young officer, unable to stand the weight any longer, shot up from his seat, fists clenched. His face was flushed, his voice rang out firm and sharp. "We refuse to be lumped in with Turner. He's destroyed the honor of this force. If we don't cut him loose now, everything we've worked for all these years will turn to ashes." The words hit the room like a jolt. A few nodded slightly, others bowed their heads, unwilling to admit it, but silently agreeing. The chief's eyes flashed with irritation. He inhaled deeply, but couldn't rebuke him. The young officer had spoken for many, and no one could argue against the truth. Out in the hallway, the sound of footsteps echoed in a steady rhythm. News from outside kept pouring in, every message from the public, every update from international media displayed on the wall-mounted screen. A video replayed showing Turner pointing the gun, the caption below in bold, "This is an insult to justice." Officers glanced at the screen. The tension thickened. Everyone felt like their chair was lined with spikes. Any slight movement would sting. The meeting dragged on without direction. Some suggested temporarily suspending Turner, others called for a public apology, while a few insisted on waiting for orders from higher up. Everyone clashed, disagreed, and no consensus was reached. The police chief remained silent in the end, his fingers tapping unconsciously on the stack of files. He knew his silence would be seen as complicity, but any words spoken now would be like tossing fuel onto the fire. In that room, anxious faces mirrored a shared fear. Careers, honor, and public trust were slipping away like sand through fingers. Turner was the focal point, but the shadow he cast now loomed over the entire force, and everyone knew whether they wanted to or not, they would have to face the mounting pressure because justice had already spoken, and society was no longer willing to wait. As the tension in the meeting room neared its breaking point, a staff member entered carrying a thick file, placing it in front of the chief. The sound of paper hitting the table echoed sharply, prompting several heads to lift. The chief flipped through a few pages quickly, his already tense expression growing heavier. Inside the file was a list of complaints from past years, all aimed at Blake Turner. Some accused him of rough behavior during patrols, others of using discriminatory language during arrests, and a few were involved in suspected assaults without justification. These records had been dismissed in the past due to lack of evidence, but now, under the spotlight of public public outrage, they had become undeniable proof of a buried history. An older officer let out a bitter sigh and said, "This isn't new. We've known for a long time and we let it slide." The words cut into the silence like a blade. All eyes turned to the chief, waiting for a response, but he said nothing, still tapping the file, his eyes dark. It didn't need to be said aloud. Everyone understood the system had protected Turner for too long, and now the cost wasn't just one incident, but a long chain of unchecked failures. In the thick air, the young officer's voice rose again, firmer this time. "This isn't a choice anymore. If Turner keeps wearing the uniform, the public will see us all as the same. We'll lose the trust of this entire city." Others nodded, a rare moment of agreement after hours of conflict. They knew there was no turning back, and any hesitation would be crushed by public fury. A decision was made quickly with no drawn-out votes, no more circling around. Turner would be suspended from duty immediately. The order was signed and stamped, the bright red paper resting on the table like a full stop at the end of the path he had walked. No one clapped, no one expressed relief, because everyone understood this was not the end, but only the beginning of a much bigger storm. When the news spread outside, the atmosphere in front of the police station erupted. The crowd cheered, raised banners high, and many filmed the moment and posted it online as proof of an initial victory. An elderly veteran stood in the middle of the crowd, his voice hoarse but heavy with weight. "This is just the first step. Justice doesn't stop at a suspension." His words were quickly shared, echoing alongside the chants of thousands. In the meeting room, the police chief sat still, eyes fixed on the signed paper. He knew well that suspending Turner wasn't just about disciplining one man, but a late admission that the system had allowed darkness to thrive for too long. And now, with the truth exposed, no one had the right to look away, because the pressure outside still pressed heavily and the storm was far from over. In the large university auditorium, sunlight streamed through tall windows onto the long rows of seats packed with students, the atmosphere unusually serious. On the big screen, the clip showing Turner pointing a gun at Maya played again, the shaky sound from a phone recording still clear in the silent room. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the frames, their expressions shifting from shock to anger. At the front, the sociology professor tapped the desk to begin the discussion, his voice calm but heavy. "Today, we're not talking about theory, we're talking about reality. Tell me, where is justice in this video?" A student stood up, voice firm. "I see justice buried beneath the barrel of a gun. A person who once defended this country was humiliated in front of a crowd. This isn't just about one person. This is a wake-up call for all of us." Applause broke out, spreading across the auditorium in strong agreement. More hands shot up. A short-haired girl spoke, her voice slightly shaky but determined. "What haunts me most isn't the gun. It's Maya's calm gaze. She proved that honor can stand firm against violence. This is a lesson society must not forget." The atmosphere grew livelier, with debates erupting, students sharing their thoughts, analyzing Turner's actions and Maya's response. They weren't just condemning, they were trying to draw meaning for the wider community. One student group decided to turn the discussion into action. They stood up, rolled out a large piece of cardboard at the front of the room, and began writing slogans. First, the words were simple, but gradually they formed a unified, sharp, and resonant message. Respect the uniform. Respect the people. That slogan was first shouted by a young man in the front row, then quickly echoed by the entire auditorium. Respect the uniform, respect the people. The chant bounced off the walls, echoed through the dome above, ringing out like an oath. The students rose together, holding up hastily written boards, transforming the lecture hall into a sea of messages. The professor smiled with pride, knowing this class was no longer just a sociology lesson. It had become a small movement, the beginning of a powerful voice from the next generation. News of the new slogan quickly spread beyond the campus gates, recorded and shared online. Images of hundreds of students chanting the slogan in unison became a source of inspiration, gaining support from many other schools. On street corners, posters with the phrase began to appear, and on social media, the short but powerful slogan rapidly climbed into trending topics, competing with with the explosive hashtags from before. Inside the auditorium, the discussion lasted longer than expected, but no one left their seat. They felt they were contributing to something bigger, a shared voice that extended beyond the classroom walls. The initial anger had been transformed into organized action with a message capable of reaching thousands of others. When it ended, the professor simply said, "You've proven that justice isn't only defended in the streets, it's also built right here in the lecture hall." Those words left a mark, affirming that the voice of the community was truly rising strong and unstoppable. From the university hall, clips of students chanting the slogan were quickly edited into short videos and uploaded to TikTok at lightning speed. Energetic background music was added, and the phrase, "Respect the uniform, respect the people," appeared on screen alongside footage of Maya standing tall in front of a gun. Young people began sharing remixing, adding effects, turning a tense moment into one of powerful resonance. Some clips repeated Maya's calm gaze with pounding drum beats. Others mixed the student slogan with the cheers from the square, all merging into a wide-reaching wave of momentum. By morning, TikTok was flooded with remixes of the incident, each video gathering hundreds of thousands of views, followed by tens of thousands of empathetic and outraged comments. To the youth, this wasn't just a viral trend, but a way to transform anger into creative movement. Phrases like "wrong woman" and "justice needs no badge" appeared in sync with music repeated over and over, embedding the message deep in viewers' minds. One female student posted a video of Maya raising her military ID to a rousing soundtrack captioned, "This is the new definition of courage." The video racked up millions of views within hours, becoming a highlight that others quickly followed. In the comments, people weren't just talking about Turner anymore. They had begun to see Maya as a symbol of spirit. Other platforms were swept up as well. Twitter was flooded with reposts, Instagram was filled with slogan collages, and YouTube saw a wave of commentary and analysis videos. On TikTok, each remix added fuel to the fire. People filmed themselves writing the slogan on shirts, painting it on walls, or chanting it in classrooms, all rooted in that moment Maya stood tall before a gun. From a shocking incident, the event had evolved into a widespread symbol of resistance, where everyone found a way to raise their voice. It wasn't just young people, other communities joined in too. Civil society groups leveraged the viral momentum to call for peaceful marches, using Maya's image as the central symbol. Street artists painted murals, replicating her stance, adding slogans to street corners, turning them into check-in spots that drew large crowds. Some young musicians composed songs inspired by the story, with powerful melodies that planted the belief in people's hearts that justice can arise from the most unexpected moments. The momentum grew so strong that even politicians could no longer stay silent. In public speeches, many quoted the student slogan, calling Maya a symbol of courage and a measure for evaluating change in society. Commentators labeled this a new wave of resistance in the digital age, where truth is no longer buried in internal reports but amplified by millions of hands. To the public, this incident was no longer just a police scandal. It had risen into a symbol of collective resistance. The image of Maya, standing tall, eyes sharp and unflinching, now appeared everywhere, from street murals to phone wallpapers, from printed magazines to social media banners. Protesters carried her image, students drew it on whiteboards, and children asked their parents why the woman in the video was so brave. The answer was simple yet profound, because she believed in honor and justice. And it was that belief that transformed a moment of violence into the spark that ignited a vast social movement, a movement people now called the voice of a generation unwilling to bow. Inside the city prosecutor's office, the dim yellow light from desk lamps cast shadows over towering stacks of files, making the already cramped room feel even more suffocating. Outside, phones rang constantly, staff moved hurriedly, each face tight with tension. At the center of the storm, the chief prosecutor sat upright at his desk in front of him, a thick file bearing the name Blake Turner. He pressed his pen hard against the investigation order later, the bold words "official investigation" landing like a hammer on the desk. This decision was no longer a choice. It was inevitable as the entire city boiled with anger, and the pressure from the media and public had reached their doorstep. The investigation into Turner was now officially underway, marking the beginning of a process sure to be controversial but unavoidable. As soon as the red stamp hit the page, the list of witnesses was prepared. Investigators immediately reached out to those present at the supermarket that day. A cashier recalled still hearing Turner's shouting in her head when he declared himself the law. An older customer remembered the calm in Myas's eyes as she stood before the barrel of a gun, his voice trembling but firm. "I've never seen anyone so proud." One by one, witnesses were summoned, each testimony adding a piece to the full picture of the incident, leaving no space for Turner to lie or deny. Prosecutors rushed to review the surveillance footage, comparing it with the online clips, every detail matched. They carefully noted the timeline, the dialogue, the behavior, even the crowd's reaction. Each frame became evidence, forcing Turner to confront the truth. The office buzzed with tense discussions, some worried about political pressure. Others insisted the case must be handled strictly to restore public trust. In the end, consensus emerged: this case could not be minimized because it had come to represent something much bigger than Turner himself. Meanwhile, more witnesses continued arriving at the office. A student who had been at the scene described how the crowd shouted in unison, put the gun down, and said Turner's eyes looked like those of a cornered animal. A young mother who had been shopping for groceries recalled clutching her child to shield them and said the fear still made her shake when she remembered it. These testimonies not only helped establish Turner's culpability but also underscored the gravity of what had occurred. The chief prosecutor sat in silence, listening to each report as it was read aloud, his eyes sharp and cold. He understood this was no longer a routine case, but a test of the entire system. Every page of the file, every witness statement, every video spreading online was adding pressure, forcing the prosecutor's office to act. Delay was not an option because the public had waited, and they would not stay silent if justice was ignored once more. The atmosphere in the office was so tense that even footsteps on the wooden floor sounded heavy. Investigators exchanged quick notes, scribbling fast, preparing for the next round of interviews. The whiteboard on the wall was filled with timelines, witness names, and related evidence. Everything pointed to one conclusion: Turner would have to face a formal investigation where every word and every action would be scrutinized under the light of justice. And beyond those walls, millions of eyes were still watching, waiting for every next move. The investigation order was no longer just an administrative document. It had become a promise to the community that this time the truth would not be buried. While the prosecutor's office rushed to gather evidence, an urgent communication arrived from the Department of Defense. The official letter, printed on embossed stationery, bore a brief but cutting headline: formal protest against the actions of Blake Turner. In it, the military stressed that pointing a gun at a colonel was not just a personal insult, but a violation of the honor of the entire armed forces. Every sentence was written with a firm tone, like an arrow piercing through the already crumbling reputation of the city's police department. The media immediately reported it, and images of uniformed officers speaking to the press further inflamed public opinion. A military spokesperson stared straight into the camera and declared, "We will not tolerate violations of honor. Every word, every disrespectful act must be held accountable." The statement spread quickly, becoming an official message that local leaders could no longer ignore. Blake Turner, once proud to call himself the law in this city, now found himself cornered on all sides. On one front, the prosecutor had launched a formal investigation, and his long-ignored complaint records were resurfacing, leaving him with no room to deny. On another, the military had issued a hardline protest, bringing with it pressure from politicians who had no interest in clashing with veterans or voters. Outside, citizens continued marching in protest, new slogans slogans emerging by the hour, all underscoring that Turner was no longer just an individual at fault, but a symbol of a deeper sickness within the police force. Even inside the department, many colleagues openly distanced themselves, unwilling to be dragged down by the same stain. International media continued to escalate the tension, publishing analyses on the relationship between the police and the military, comparing differences in conduct. Some foreign newspapers labeled Turner the man who threatened national honor with a single pull of the trigger. These harsh headlines were translated and widely shared, further fueling public outrage at home. Everywhere Turner went, he was met with contemptuous stares from reporters waiting to ambush him, to passers-by secretly recording clips. Every step he took seemed heavier, with no place left to hide. Turner's house also became a focal point. Outside, a small group of citizens held up banners demanding justice, forcing his family to live in a state of constant anxiety. Neighbors, whispered children watched with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Inside Turner's own mind, the pressure stacked into a crushing weight, leaving him sleepless night after night. Each evening, the chants from the square echoed back like a verdict, a reminder. He was no longer a police officer who could hide behind a badge, but a man exposed under the harsh light of public scrutiny, where every door had closed and every road led to unavoidable judgment. The courtroom was wrapped in a chilling stillness that morning, white light streaming through tall windows onto the wooden benches, making everything feel even harsher. Crowds of citizens packed the hallway, reporters raised their cameras in wait, while inside, Turner was let in with stiff shoulders and a pale face. He sat in the defendant's chair, hands resting on his thighs, unable to hide the trembling. When the judge struck the gavel, the dry crack echoed, silencing the entire room. Turner took a deep breath, then stood, his voice hoarse, but clinging to pride. "I was just doing my job." The words bounced off the cold walls and came back at him, prompting whispers from those seated behind. The prosecutor rose immediately, face cold, walking directly to the large screen in the center of the courtroom. He didn't rush. He simply signaled to the technician to play the clip that had gripped the entire nation. The footage appeared clearly. Turner, with the barrel of his gun pressed against Maya's temple, shouting insults while Maya stood tall, her gaze calm, almost defiant. The crowd's shouts echoed in the video, each cry of "put the gun down" flooding the courtroom with the tension of that moment. No narration was needed. Those images alone shattered Turner's entire defense. Turner tried to avert his eyes, but the judge motioned for him to look directly at the screen. His face flushed, sweat beaded on his forehead, his eyes flickered. His hands clenched and trembled against the armrest. The defense of "just doing my job now" sounded ridiculous, betrayed by his own image. A witness seated below couldn't hold back and blurted, "This is doing your job." A murmur spread. Security had to remind everyone to stay quiet, but no one could remain calm with the truth glaring from the screen. The prosecutor said little. He pointed at the footage and stared directly at Turner. Is this the image of a man doing his duty, or the image of someone abusing power, using a gun to disgrace another person's honor? There was no answer, because the evidence had already spoken. Turner looked down, lips pressed tightly, but his body trembled uncontrollably. The judge watched him for a long moment, expression stern, then leaned slightly toward the prosecutor in acknowledgement, as if the trial had already tilted decisively to one side. Inside the courtroom, the outrage and contempt were more palpable than ever. Citizens permitted to attend whispered among themselves, some nodding in agreement with the prosecution, others shaking their heads in anger that Turner still dared to lie. Their eyes felt like hundreds of needles piercing into his back, turning the courtroom into a dual tribunal, one of law and one of public judgment. Turner sat down, his shoulders slumping as if all strength had drained from him. He had entered a place where justifications carried no weight, where the truth stood bare, making him a solitary figure in a sea of people hungry for justice. The first hearing ended in a heavy atmosphere, with people filing out, still talking nonstop. Out in the hallway, citizens rushed to reporters, raising signs and chanting the now viral slogan, "Respect the uniform, respect the people." Turner Turner, left in silence under the eyes of hundreds, knowing that from this moment on he was no longer facing just the court of law but the harsher court of public opinion. Maya had sat quietly through the entire hearing, her eyes fixed on every detail displayed. When the clip ended, the courtroom fell into silence as if frozen by what had just been witnessed. The prosecutor glanced her way and gave a slight nod. Maya stood walking forward with calm composure, each step carrying the weight of truth. She stopped under once a weight of so many stares, her deep black eyes locking onto Turner, then sweeping across the room as if to speak to everyone at once. Her voice was warm, firm, each word clear. "I'm not afraid of a gun. I'm afraid of silence." Those words fell without theatrics but struck straight into every heart. Her statement captured the essence of the entire ordeal, exposing the haunting idea that silence equals complicity, that the gun was dangerous B. But even more dangerous was a society that bows its head. Turner stared down, hands clenched, while Maya stood firm, light from the window casting across her face as if highlighting her resolve. The courtroom held its breath for a few seconds, the stillness thick and suffocating, until it was abruptly broken. The first clap rang out from the back row, sharp and resolute. Then more hands joined in the applause, spreading, rising, swelling. In moments, the courtroom erupted into thunderous applause, bouncing off the walls, echoing from the high ceiling, turning the space into a unified force. People stood to their feet, faces lit with emotion, some with tear-filled eyes, others nodding as if they had finally found the answer to everything they had been holding in. The judge banged the gavel to restore order, but the slight tremble at the corner of his mouth and the look in his eyes betrayed his empathy. The prosecutor, seated below, gave a small nod, his eyes shimmering with conviction. The witnesses lowered their heads and smiled softly as if released from the burden of fear they had carried since the day of the incident. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras panned across the room to capture every moment. And at the center of it all, Maya still stood, her expression composed. But it was that very calmness that radiated strength spreading across the room. The resounding applause wasn't just for May. It was the courtroom's way of declaring that they chose truth, that they rejected silence. Maya's brief statement had broken through the confines of the trial, becoming a rallying cry for those yearning for justice. And on that cold morning, the courtroom was transformed into a place where a community spoke as one, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the fight to reclaim dignity and trust. The courthouse hallway that day was packed with reporters, camera shutters flashing non-stop, the sound of scribbling pens like rainfall. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled and many people stood along the walls to watch. Overhead lights shone directly on the witness stand where a middle-aged man sat, face tense but eyes resolute. He adjusted the microphone in front of him and recounted what he had witnessed years ago. Turner assaulted a civilian right on the street just because the man talked back. I saw him knock the guy to the ground, then threatened to shoot him if he stood up again. His testimony echoed through the room, shaking the court. Journalists immediately took notes, some exchanging looks, knowing they had just received a key piece that exposed the defendant's true character. The atmosphere grew heavier as the prosecutor signaled for the military's legal representative to step forward. The attorney, dressed in a dark suit, held a thick file. He placed it on the table, opened it page by page, and spoke in a firm, steady voice. Beyond the incident, captured on video, we have evidence that Turner was previously under internal investigation for abuse of power. This is a report from the Inspector General 3 years ago detailing several civilian complaints. Paused, pulling out a set of crime scene photos showing bruises on a young man's body, accompanied by a written statement signed by a witness. Handing everything to the court, he concluded, "This was not an isolated outburst. This is a pattern of behavior." Whispers spread across the courtroom, faces turning toward each other, no doubt remaining. Turner sat at the defendant's table, eyes darting, sweat forming on his brow. He tried to appear composed, but his lips were tightly pressed, his hand twitching on his thigh. Every piece of evidence struck like a hammer, and each witness statement sliced through the mask he had worn for so long. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the transformation on his face. Where arrogance had once sat raw, fear now remained. In the back row, a young woman covered her mouth, eyes welling with anger. Beside her, an elderly veteran shook his head and whispered to his neighbor, "This is the price we pay for past silence when complaints were ignored." His words served as a reminder, briefly quiet in the room before a wave of harsh murmurs surged again. The judge watched from the bench with stern, focused eyes, never leaving Turner. He struck the gavel once the sharp sound, pulling the room back to order. "All evidence will be reviewed thoroughly. This courtroom allows no excuse." The judge's words rang out like a declaration confirming that from this moment on Turner's mask had cracked and the truth of who he was being stripped away layer by layer before the entire public. Turner sat silently for a while, his eyes bloodshot from hearing every witness statement and watching each file laid bare, but then he couldn't hold it in any longer. Just as the military lawyer finished speaking, he sprang to his feet, his chair crashing backward against the floor with a loud bang. His face flushed, red veins bulging along his neck, and his palm slammed onto the table so hard it startled the entire courtroom. His voice erupted, hoarse but furious. "It's all lies. You're trying to smear me, make me out to be some kind of monster. I've dedicated my whole life to this job, and this is how you repay me." His shout was sharp and jarring, causing several people in the gallery to instinctively recoil. Cameras flashed nonstop as reporters captured every second of his unraveling. The prosecutor remained still, arms crossed, his gaze cold. The military lawyer tilted his head slightly, revealing a faint smirk, knowing full well Turner was exposing his own true nature. The crowd in the courtroom murmured, many nodding at one another, recognizing that the man who once wore the police uniform to hide his brutality had now revealed his real face. Turner kept shouting, pointing down toward the witness stand, his eyes blazing. "You're lying. All of you are lying. None of you understands what my job is." His rage made him tremble, sweat dripping from his chin, yet he didn't bother to wipe it away. He looked like a cornered animal thrashing in hopeless desperation. The judge had been sitting solemnly from the beginning, his deep-set eyes tracking every movement. When Turner slammed his hand on the table again, the gavel came down with a sharp crack, cutting through the shouting. "Order!" The judge's voice was calm but firm, instantly quiet in the room. Turner looked like he was about to speak again, but the judge's icy stare forced the words back down his throat. The room held its breath. The judge leaned forward, his voice ringing out with clarity, each word etched into the walls. "You are digging your own grave." That warning shook the courtroom. It wasn't just a call for order, it was a judgment from the highest authority in the room. Several people nodded quietly, one even clapped softly in agreement because the statement captured what everyone felt. Turner was burying his own career and honor. His face turned pale, his lips trembling without producing a word. The aggression that had flared moments before now seemed pitiful against the cold finality of that warning. The courtroom returned to order, but the tension remained thick. Cameras kept rolling, pens kept moving, reporters smiling, knowing they had tomorrow's headline. Turner slumped back into the defendant's chair, his shoulders heavy, eyes vacant. Another layer of his mask had fallen off, and this time there was no more hiding. The room stayed silent, but everyone knew that from this moment forward his path could only go one way, down into the very pit he had just been warned about, and there was no way out. While the trial was still underway, a massive wave of information had already taken shape outside. International news channels simultaneously replayed footage of Turner pointing his gun at Maya, edited with sharp, cutting commentary. The image of a gun barrel pressed to the temple of a calm-eyed black woman quickly became a symbol of the failure of a system once expected to protect its citizens. From newspaper covers to television screens and major online platforms that image spread like a blade, slicing through the honor of the police force, prompting the global public to ask, how could a trained officer turn into such a blatant abuser of power? Analyses poured in one after another, with international experts dissecting and comparing how various countries deal with systemic discrimination in law enforcement. A major European outlet published a lengthy article asserting that Turner's drawing his weapon wasn't merely a personal failure, but a spotlight on a deeply flawed management system. Media outlets across Asia and South America joined in, reposting the image of Maya standing tall and naming her a new symbol of courage, while Turner was branded as the face of broken trust. Never before had a domestic incident become a global topic of debate this quickly, and the scope of this exposure pushed pressure to an uncontrollable level. Domestic politicians were forced to respond. In an emergency congressional session, multiple representatives stood to fiercely criticize the police force, calling the Turner case a wake-up call. One young congresswoman declared firmly, "We cannot allow citizens to feel safer encountering the military than the police. This is our greatest shame and our last chance to change." Her statement was widely quoted and became the first rallying cry for sweeping reform. New slogans emerged at protests: "Reform the police, save the people." The words were simple but powerful, becoming a unified message embraced by many communities. The pressure didn't stop at speeches. Some seasoned politicians even proposed cutting funding, demanding a full review of recruitment and training procedures within the police force. These proposals sparked debate, but were also widely supported by the public. The people's outrage had turned into political leverage, forcing leaders to abandon silence. Public opinion polls showed trust in the police had fallen to historic lows, while trust in the military and civil organizations surged. In that context, Turner was no longer just an individual on trial. He had become the symbol of an entire system's failure. Every time his image appeared on screen, people saw the shadow of abuse, of ignored complaints, of fear that had lingered in the community. In contrast, every time Maya appeared, the public saw hope, saw the belief that honor could still stand firm against injustice. That stark contrast was the core of a power shift where the voice of the people, the weight of public opinion, and the decisions of political leaders converged, tipping the entire scale in a new direction. And in that wave, Turner became increasingly isolated, while justice and truth slowly took center stage in every action. Amid the explosion of public opinion and media coverage, the military decided to break its silence. A press conference was held right at the headquarters of the Department of Defense, where dozens of flags fluttered in the wind and microphones crowded the podium. The spokesperson, dressed in full uniform, eyes, sharp voice echoing through the still air, declared, "No one has the right to insult an officer." The brief but forceful statement was both a declaration that honor could not be trampled and a message to society that the military would not stand by while one of its own was humiliated. The press picked it up immediately, and the statement appeared widely on front pages across social media and in everyday conversations, becoming a shield protecting the dignity of those who had served the nation. Immediately after the statement, pressure on the prosecutor's office intensified. Petitions from civil organizations, veterans associations, and citizens filled the desks. People demanded not just punishment for Turner as an individual, but a strong response from the system to prove that justice was real. The chief prosecutor held an emergency meeting with his aides, flipping through pages of evidence, reviewing every clip and analyzing each testimony. They understood that if this case were allowed to fade, the result would be a complete collapse of public trust. The final decision was reached with overwhelming consensus. Turner would be formally prosecuted on multiple charges, including abuse of power assault and violation of human dignity. The indictment was announced that same afternoon, the bold type on the official document slicing through any remaining chance of redemption. The news spread quickly, aired on every major news broadcast, and was updated minute by minute on digital platforms. Crowds erupted in cheers in the public squares, many embracing each other in overwhelming joy, and the protest slogans turned into triumphant chants affirming the victory of truth. Outside the prosecutor's office, the crowd that had gathered early erupted when the news broke. Cheers blended with the sound of drums, flags, and banners fluttered in the wind. An elderly veteran stood among the people, his voice hoarse but firm. "Honor has been defended. This is only the beginning, but it proves that no one is above the law." His words were quickly picked up by reporters and appeared as a featured quote on the front pages the next day. Turner sat in the holding cell, his face blank, as his lawyer delivered the news of the indictment. He clutched the edge of the table, his eyes lost as if he couldn't believe it. But every door had closed. He was no longer the officer who once believed himself untouchable, but the officially charged defendant in a case that had shaken the entire nation. And as the indictment document was publicly posted, the entire society exhaled because justice had moved beyond promises. It had taken an irreversible step forward. The courtroom was packed that day. Every bench filled the hallways, leaving no space to stand. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew this would be the decisive moment. Turner entered, his face, gaunt eyes dull, like someone drained of life. He sat at the defendant's bench, hands trembling slightly, avoiding the piercing stares from every direction. The judge sat high on the bench, the gavel placed in front of him, his stern eyes sweeping the room. The prosecutor stood ready with stacks of thick files, the military attorney beside him, calm-faced, eyes sharp. The entire courtroom fell silent as the judge struck the gavel, opening the final hearing. The sentencing was read aloud slowly, each word clear, keeping everyone frozen. Turner was found guilty of abuse of power, threatening the life of a citizen, and insulting a military officer. The judge paused for a beat, then declared firmly, "Blake Turner is permanently stripped of his position with no chance of returning to the police force and will be held legally accountable for the charges confirmed." The words landed like a hammer's blow, ending the path Turner had once arrogantly believed untouchable. Turner hung his head low, hands clasped together, trembling violently. He seemed too drained to react, with nothing left to argue. The world around him blurred into vague sounds. Only the phrase, "permanently stripped of position," echoed like a rope tightening around his body. His face grew more hollow, his empty eyes fixed on the wooden floor where the light cast a long cold streak. Reporters captured every frame, ready to print it. Front page, a final image of a man who had once strutted, now broken. Outside the courthouse, cheers erupted as the news spread. Thousands who had gathered since morning had waited for this moment, and when the final ruling came, they burst with joy. Banners lifted high, drums and horns blared in celebration. A silver-bearded veteran shouted, "Justice has won." Others chanted in unison, a wave of voices, rising with force, drowning out even the traffic noise nearby. It felt like a victory parade where people from all walks of life shared in the release after days of tension. On nearby balconies, families clapped together, children shouted with joy, and adults cried with emotion. A middle-aged woman wiped away tears, whispering, "Finally justice." Candles were held up, their flickering light blending with the belief that truth had not been buried. The entire square outside the courthouse became a glowing sea of people, where faith was affirmed and justice no longer felt like a slogan, but a visible, undeniable reality. In the courtroom, the judge set down the gavel, his eyes stern, but the corner of his mouth revealed a quiet hint of satisfaction. The prosecutor exhaled in relief. The military attorney nodded firmly, and Maya, seated in the witness row, allowed herself a small smile, her gaze unwavering. Everyone understood that today's verdict was not only a punishment for Turn, but a declaration to society justice still exists, and anyone, no matter the uniform they wear, must bow before the truth. At the moment the gavel struck for the final time, every eye in the courtroom turned to Maya. She sat upright, her face calm after hours of listening to every accusation and piece of evidence. As the final sentence was read, Maya gave a slight nod, a simple gesture that carried the full weight of agreement. Her eyes held a steady determination, not a triumph over Turner, but the conviction that honor had been defended and truth had found its place. That gaze reached those around her, leaving witnesses and reporters silent for a moment because they knew it wasn't the look of a victor, but of someone who had always stood with justice. Then, suddenly, the previously silent courtroom erupted. Applause broke out first, scattered from the back rows, then quickly swept across the room. The sound was crisp, relentless, echoing off the walls and ceiling, forming a single rhythm of belief and release. People rose to their feet, many with tears in their eyes, some unable to stop themselves from shouting justice with overwhelming emotion. The applause wasn't just for the sentence, nor only for Maya. It was a collective affirmation that justice had been spoken through the strength of the people and the shared faith of a community. Outside the courthouse, the cheers of thousands instantly joined the wave of applause inside. Banners were raised, chants echoed in unison, the air electric like a festival. News stations broadcast the scene live, letting the whole nation witness the moment justice was no longer an abstract ideal. Maya's steady gaze inside the thunderous clapping and the shouted slogans from the square merged into one living declaration that truth can triumph over violence. In that moment, Turner sat motionless, surrounded by the judgment of the law and the weight of public scrutiny. But the courtroom no longer paid him attention. All focus shifted to Maya, to the symbol of faith that never bowed to a gun. People left the courthouse with radiant faces, many clasping hands, whispering that they would forever remember this moment as a milestone of justice. The applause still echoed, lingering in everyone's minds like a promise that justice would not end today but continue to be defended in every act of the generations to come. In the police academy's training room, wooden chairs were neatly arranged, and the whiteboard at the front was filled with bullet points from the lecture. The atmosphere was quiet, in stark contrast to the unrest outside, yet the Turner incident lingered in every word. A gray-haired instructor opened a file and projected onto the large screen the image seen around the world. Turner aiming his gun at Maya in a crowded supermarket. He looked directly at the cadets, his voice firm. This is a lesson you must remember, and it will follow you throughout your careers. From now on, the Turner case is part of our curriculum, not to shame an individual, but to remind us that professional honor can collapse from a single wrong action. The room was silent, young faces, tense, eyes fixed and thoughtful. They didn't just see a man who lost control, but a system that once enabled him and had to answer for it under public scrutiny. A cadet in the front row raised a hand, voice steady. We must understand respect before drawing a weapon, because if a gun appears, it must come with responsibility and a justified reason, not impulse or bias. The class nodded pens, moved quickly across notebooks as if no one wanted to miss what truly mattered. The instructor tapped the desk gently and continued. He emphasized that Turner didn't fail simply because he pointed a gun. His greatest failure was in devaluing human dignity. A weapon might end a situation in a moment, but disrespect leaves lasting wounds in society. His words made several young faces lower, reflecting more deeply on the burden they were preparing to carry. On the screen, another clip began to play, this time showing students and community members chanting slogans in unison after the incident. The instructor gave a faint smile, then said, "You see, when an officer fails, the people will be the first to demand justice. Never believe the uniform is a shield. It only has meaning if the person wearing it earns respect." His words echoed across the room, carving deeper than any textbook page ever could. As the lesson ended, the cadets lingered, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes no longer as carefree as when they first entered. They now understood more clearly the fine line between protection and abuse of power, between duty and arrogance. The Turner case had become a turning point, not just breaking news, but a living lesson etched directly into the hearts of these young recruits preparing to wear the uniform. And from that classroom, a new generation of officers was beginning to form, carrying the reminder that justice doesn't lie lie in the barrel of a gun, but in the respect for every human being. As the session seemed to draw to a close, the room remained silent, no one rushing to pack their notebooks. Eyes lingered on the dark screen after Turner's image faded, the atmosphere weighed down by reflection. Just then, a young officer seated near the back stood up, his voice clear and resolute. "We cannot let history repeat itself." The brief statement pierced through the silence like an arrow, drawing every head to turn in unison. He said nothing more, but in his bright, unwavering eyes everyone saw a determination that was not just personal. It was a collective vow from a generation about to wear the uniform of law enforcement. The instructor gave a subtle nod, his smile tired, but his eyes glimmering with hope. He knew that one sentence carried more weight than any long lecture because it came from genuine understanding. The other cadets began nodding as well, hands instinctively tightening around their pens like silently clenching a promise. The mood in the room shifted, not heavy with Turner's image, but lifted by a shared belief that those mistakes would not be repeated in their footsteps. The room filled with the sound of chairs shifting as the students stood all at once, a spontaneous gesture that felt like a silent ritual. Light from the windows streamed across the rows of young faces, each one proud and composed. Some looked up at the ceiling, others closed their eyes for a moment, but all of them held the same inner resolve to bring about real change. No one said another word yet. That silence spoke volumes. It was nothing like the cowardly silence Maya had once warned against. This was the silence of willpower, of quiet but unshakable unity. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the cadets walked out into the hallway, but the usual chatter and laughter were gone. They moved in groups, exchanging serious looks, whispering about responsibility and how to rebuild public trust. One said softly, "We have to be different from him." Another replied, "Justice can't fall again." These brief, determined exchanges made clear that this lesson had truly left a mark. Outside, a gentle breeze swept across the training yard, the flag on the pole fluttering in the sunlight. Taking in the view, the instructor felt a sense of peace, knowing that the seeds just planted would grow within each of these young people. The air had unmistakably shifted, no longer weighed down by doubt, but charged with new conviction, ready to face the future with a different mindset. And within that transformation, the young officer's words still echoed a reminder, meant not just for today, but for the long road ahead of those sworn to uphold justice. In the large university lecture hall, white light poured down on rows packed with students, the atmosphere quiet, tense. On the board, the professor wrote the discussion topic, "The Consequences of Discrimination in Law Enforcement." Research papers were passed hand to hand as groups of students presented the results of weeks of work. One group displayed statistical charts on abuse of power complaints. Another analyzed key cases, with Turner's becoming a prominent example. The sound of presentations blended with the quick scratch of pens on paper, creating a rhythm that was energetic yet heavy with contemplation. When it was the last group's turn, a black student stepped onto the podium. He held a set of documents, trembling slightly in his hands, his face tense but his eyes glowing with intensity. His voice was hoarse as he began, "This research is not just numbers. It's pain that generations have endured, the fear that grips us every time we step outside and see the red and blue lights of a police car." The hall fell silent, every eye fixed on him, drawn by the sincerity in every word. He paused, eyes reddened, then continued, choked up. "We saw Turner point a gun at an officer, but out there, so many ordinary people have also been targeted. This research records the evidence, but our hearts feel it the deepest." At that moment, he couldn't hold back. Tears fell, his voice broke. "We have the right to stand tall." The sob blended with his declaration, becoming a cry more powerful than any statistic could illustrate. That moment pierced straight into everyone's heart. No more murmurs, no more curious glances. The entire hall sank into deep emotion. Many students bowed their heads, clenched their fists, and some wiped away quiet tears. The professor, sitting below, nodded slowly, eyes eyes glistening, acknowledging that today's lesson didn't come from the syllabus, but from the heart of a student brave enough to speak the truth. Applause broke out from a corner, hesitant at first, then spreading into a steady rising rhythm. The entire hall stood. The applause was not just encouragement, but a confirmation of the students' words, a collective agreement that this generation would not bow to injustice. They looked at one another, sharing determined glances, and then, through the clapping voices, rose together. "We have the right to stand tall." The atmosphere in the lecture hall erupted, but it was no longer chaotic noise. It was the awakening of collective strength. The research papers on the desks were no longer just assignments, but evidence of an emerging intellectual movement. The professor smiled, his face filled with hope, knowing he had just witnessed a new generation finding its voice. And from that day on, the students' words were no longer seen as an emotional outburst, but as a widely embraced principle of life, proof that justice isn't found on paper, but in the hearts of those brave enough to stand tall. The clapping rose in waves, starting with a few, but quickly sweeping across the entire hall. Hands collided in rhythm, sharp and lively, like rallying drums filling the heavy space with irresistible energy. Students jumped to their feet row after row, becoming a unified sea of solidarity, the roar of applause overpowering even the rain outside the windows. In that moment, differences in skin color, background, or belief faded away, leaving only a shared spirit to affirm human dignity and defend honor. The professor stood silently, eyes misty, knowing this was a moment no lecture could create, a moment where students had turned emotion into collective action. The eruption inside the hall didn't stop at applause. It spread through determined gazes, firm nods, and smiles mixed with tears. A female student whispered to her friend, "We have to keep going. This can't end here." Her friend nodded, hands red from clapping too long, but eyes shining bright. Across the room, everyone felt they had taken part in a shared vow not signed on paper, but declared through the rhythm of hands clapping hard into the air, hands that carried the force to unite a generation. As the sound died down, silence took on new meaning. No longer heavy as it had been at the start, it now felt like a pause for each person to absorb what had just unfolded. Every student carried the feeling that they weren't alone in their belief that around them stood a community ready to rise when needed. The phrase, "We have the right to stand tall," was quietly repeated from the back row, then many nodded with faint smiles, as if those words had become a quiet current in their minds, powerful without needing to be shouted. That belief began spreading beyond the lecture hall. Students brought the story to social media, writing about the experience, sharing their emotions, and turning it into a new thread in public discussion. Those who hadn't been there were inspired, reading the posts and finding resonance. Some professors in other departments heard what happened and chose to weave themes of justice and dignity into their lectures. From one shared moment of applause, a ripple effect had begun like circles spreading across water from a single stone, growing wider with every passing day. That afternoon, in a quiet corner of the campus courtyard, a few students lingered to continue their conversation. They spoke of responsibility, of the desire to make change, and of a belief that the truth could not stay hidden forever. The last light of day fell across their young faces, reflecting a steady determination. They knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but the morning had proven something essential. Together, they had the power to make society listen. And from the moment the entire class rose in applause, a new sense of conviction had been etched into their hearts, spreading beyond the lecture hall walls, planting the seeds of change the entire community had been waiting for. The memorial square in the morning glowed with new colors. On the large front-facing wall, street artists had completed a massive mural titled "Justice Needs Courage." The painting stood out with Maya's bright eyes staring straight ahead, behind her a glowing halo symbolizing unyielding belief. Bold strokes in red, black, and yellow intertwined, drawing everyone who passed to stop. Crowds gathered, phones held capturing photos to share on social media. Soon, the wall became a new meeting point where people came not only to remember, but to affirm the spirit that justice must be defended with courage. The atmosphere in the square square went beyond art. Social organizations quickly joined in setting up small booths around the area to raise funds for victims of abuse of power. On long wooden tables, clear donation boxes gradually filled with bills and loose change. Elderly people, young adults, and even children came by to drop in what they could as a gesture of support. Nearby, a digital board showed online contributions climbing steadily, reflecting solidarity from all over. A female veteran handing over a donation check said, "This isn't just money, it's our promise that we won't abandon the vulnerable." Her words sparked thunderous applause, creating a warm, unified spirit in the square. Student groups, young legal associations, and independent artists all took part. They hosted short speeches, music performances, and photo exhibits centered on justice. The sound of a guitar, mixed with the clear voice of a young singer, moved many to tears. The chorus repeated the phrase, "Justice needs courage," and soon the entire square sang along. A sense of connection spread, transforming the space into a true community gathering where no one stood alone but as part of a collective bound by shared belief. The event also drew media attention, with cameras panning across the crowd, capturing scenes of people lining up to sign a massive whiteboard placed in the square's center. Each signature was a pledge, each stroke another beat in the rhythm of unity. International journalists noted how rare it was to see a protest movement expressed through such a powerful blend of art, music, action, and heartfelt solidarity. These images made it onto the evening news, spreading inspiration not just nationwide, but around the world. In the afternoon, as the sun dipped low, hundreds of candles were lit around the mural. The flickering lights reflected on the faces of those gathered, creating an atmosphere that was solemn yet full of hope. People held hands, stood in silence for several minutes, then began singing an old song about faith and justice. Their voices blended soft but resolute, like a reminder that the movement wouldn't end in the square, but would keep spreading, lighting up many more hearts along the way. From the mural to the donated coins from the song to the signatures, everything came together to form an invisible thread connecting the community. The once quiet Memorial Square had become the heart of unity, where each person found strength in those around them, where the message, "Justice needs courage," was no longer just words on a wall, but a living vow carried in the hearts of thousands. As night fell, the Memorial Square remained bright with thousands of candles. Among the crowd, the sound of a guitar rose from a small corner, its rhythm slow but steady, followed by a clear voice singing. The song had been written in haste during the tense days leading up to this moment, with a simple melody, but lyrics that struck deep. "Justice needs courage. Justice needs us." The verses floated with the wind, then were joined by other voices. At first, only a few joined in, then the whole square sang together. Each note resonated, echoing through the space as if the brick walls and trees themselves were singing along. Music dissolved all differences, turning strangers into a collective bound by shared belief. Beaming faces, tear-filled eyes, glowing in candlelight, all turned toward the rising song. Children held their parents' hands and sang along. Young people placed their hands over their hearts, and elders nodded in rhythm. It felt like a sacred ceremony where justice was no longer an abstract idea, but the heartbeat of the entire community. A foreign journalist standing in the crowd whispered to a colleague, "I've never seen a song turn an entire square into a chorus for truth like this." The song didn't stay within the square. It was recorded, streamed live, and shared across social media, making millions who weren't physically there feel part of it. The music didn't end when the song finished. It lingered in conversations, and the determination lit within every heart. People turned and embraced one another, eyes filled with warmth and belief. Out of that emotion, the story of Maya and Turner became more than a scandal. It transformed into a living symbol. Across forums and social media, images of the square, filled with candlelight and voices, became proof that justice can be awakened by collective action, by a shared belief in human dignity. Many newspapers published that image with the headline, The story has gone beyond the verdict, becoming a new symbol of justice. People no longer mentioned Turner as the center, but spoke of Maya as the flag bearer and of the community as the heart that sparked the flame. The murals, the student research papers, the marches, and the open forums were now interconnected in one continuous movement. The song that echoed that night was the final thread turning a wave of resistance into a lasting spiritual legacy. From that moment on, the story was no longer confined to a single city or a single point in time. It entered classrooms as a case study, appeared in journalism as a standard, and lived in public memory as a reminder that justice only exists where there is courage. Each time the melody was sung again, people remembered not just Maya, but the moment they stood together sharing one heartbeat. That story, through music and belief, became a new symbol of justice, shining like a candle that never burns out in the minds of those who witnessed it. In the grand hall of the Ministry of Defense, bright lights shone down on rows of solemn seats, with flags raised high behind the ceremonial podium. A formal atmosphere filled the space, every step echoing clearly across the polished floor. In the front row sat high-ranking officers with serious expressions. Behind them were hundreds of soldiers in crisp uniforms, medals gleaming on their shoulders. Amid the dignified silence, the name Maya Johnson was announced, the loudspeaker carrying her name across the hall, igniting anticipation. Maya stepped up to the podium, her stance steady, her gaze calm yet profound, marked by the trials of recent months. A senior commander held a red velvet box, slowly opening it to reveal a gleaming medal under the lights. He looked Maya in the eye and said firmly, "For your courage, for your honor, and for the trust you upheld before the entire society, the military awards you its highest honor." Thunderous applause filled the hall as the medal was pinned to Maya's chest. She bowed slightly, one hand placed over her heart, her eyes reflecting deep emotion and pride. It was not just a personal honor, but a declaration that truth can stand firm against all oppression. Moments after the medal was awarded, Maya's fellow soldiers rose in unison. They turned to face her, raising their hands in salute, each movement precise and solemn. The sight of hundreds of arms lifted in salute brought a swell of emotion through the hall. The synchronized stomp of boots echoed like a heroic anthem honoring courage. Maya looked out at her comrades, their eyes meeting with mutual respect, trust, and a bond stronger than words. The audience, including civilian guests, also stood and applauded without pause. The clapping joined the rhythmic steps of the formation, turning the hall into a single, unified beat. Some wiped away tears, others clenched their fists, knowing this moment celebrated not just one woman, but the power of honor and bravery. Journalists captured each frame, ensuring the image of Maya standing tall in that solemn ceremony would be shared widely, becoming a new symbol of resilience. In that moment, Maya didn't give a speech, but her calm smile said it all. Her fellow soldiers looked at her and saw the image of trust and loyalty, while citizens watching the live broadcast saw that justice had been upheld, not only in the courtroom but also within the military, where honor is held above all else. And from that ceremony, a clear message was sent. Honor cannot be trampled, courage will always be recognized, and history will remember the moment the entire hall rose to salute the woman who dared face the barrel of a gun to defend the truth. Maya stood tall under the brilliant lights of the hall, the newly awarded medal gleaming on her chest, its metallic shine reflecting in the eyes of the hundreds watching her. She stepped slowly up to the podium, her hands gripping its edge as if to channel the weight of all she had endured into every word. The space was utterly silent, everyone waiting, even the cameras, seeming to hold their breath to capture the moment. Maya raised her head, her voice deep and steady, not trembling but firm. Honor cannot be tarnished. That statement rang out like a bell, striking deep into the hearts of everyone in the hall. It wasn't a slogan, but the distilled truth of everything she had lived through from the moment she faced the gun to when she walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. Honor cannot be tarnished was not just Maya's declaration, but a message to society that every person has the right to uphold their dignity in the face of injustice. Her voice was not dramatic or loud, but more powerful than any shout because it was carried by truth and courage. For a few seconds, the room remained silent as if to let her words sink in. Then, suddenly, applause erupted from the front rows, spreading like wildfire. Wave after wave of sound rolled through, echoing loud and fierce, pulling the whole hall into a storm of emotion. Citizens, officers, comrades all rose together, hands clapping non-stop, eyes shining toward Maya. Some clapped until their hands were sore, some cried while still applauding because they knew they were witnessing a historic moment. The applause didn't stop in the hall. It was broadcast live to millions of viewers. Families stood up in their living rooms, students in dormitories clapped in unison, turning the entire nation into one massive auditorium. Maya's words were quoted instantly on breaking news running across television tickers and becoming the headline of countless articles. Those simple words quickly became a guiding principle for a broader movement, affirming the belief that justice cannot be distorted and honor cannot be trampled. As the applause gradually faded, Maya bowed her head slightly in gratitude, a gentle smile appearing on her resolute face. The hall remained brightly lit, filled with a deep sense of respect and appreciation. Everyone knew that the words just spoken would not end there, but would continue to echo through everyday life in classrooms, on the streets, and in ongoing debates about justice. And at that very moment, as the applause still lingered in the air, the entire hall understood that history had just marked a new milestone, where one woman had turned pain into strength and affirmed through her own experience that honor, once defended by truth, can never be tarnished. In the small classroom of an elementary school morning, sunlight streamed through the window, falling across old wooden desks. On the blackboard, the teacher wrote in white chalk a story about courage. The room was completely silent, and wide-eyed children stared at her, curious and waiting for something special. The teacher smiled gently, then began to speak, her voice slow but firm. Did you know there was a woman named Maya Johnson who, when faced with a gun pointed straight at her, stood tall without fear to protect honor and justice? The story echoed through the tiny classroom, carrying a weight far beyond the children's years. The kids sat upright, eyes wide, picturing a woman standing calmly in danger. Some gripped the edges of their desks, others tilted their heads, faces full of excitement and wonder. When the teacher paused, a boy raised his hand, his voice innocent yet serious. Why wasn't she afraid of the gun? The question was simple but piercing, silencing the class again as they waited while the teacher gave a soft smile. Her eyes filled with faith that this moment was planting something precious in their hearts. She walked closer, knelt to their level, and replied, because she believed there are things as stronger than guns, truth, and honor. When we believe in what's right, fear no longer holds us back. Her words were soft but deeply felt, prompting nods all around. A younger girl whispered, then if I see something unfair someday, I won't stay quiet either. The teacher placed a hand on her shoulder, nodding gently, eyes filled with pride. The mood in the classroom changed. It was no longer just story time, but something like a quiet ceremony, planting belief in justice into young hearts. The students eagerly raised their hands, sharing their thoughts. One said they wanted to draw a picture of Maya. Another said they'd write about it in their journal so they wouldn't forget. Each small promise seemed minor, but together they formed a shared belief, like a young tree being nurtured by light and courage. The teacher stepped back, listening to the murmur of children, talking, her heart full of hope, because she knew this story would stay with them, growing alongside them over the years. It would become an unshakable memory, a small light to guide them through hard times. And in those clear young eyes, she saw the shape of a future generation where justice is no longer a distant idea, but a living action passed down from the example of Maya Johnson. The whole class held its breath as the teacher sat down, her eyes gently fixed on the boy who had just asked the question. Her voice rang out slowly but firmly, each word carrying a deep affirmation, because she believed in the truth. The answer was simple, without any complexity, yet it seemed to settle over the classroom like a hush. Wide-eyed children took in her words as if a great secret had just been revealed. They no longer saw Maya as just a character in a story, but began to understand that true strength doesn't come from a gun or from power or a badge, but from an unshakable belief in the truth. A little girl in the front row whispered to her friend, "If she believed in the truth, then I will too." The innocent words made the nearby children smile, but in those smiles was a shared sense that truth had quietly taken root in that young heart. The teacher looked around the room and saw a clear change in their eyes, no longer just curious, but now filled with belief. That very belief would become a foundation, helping them be braver when faced with the choice between staying silent and speaking up. In that peaceful moment, the teacher walked to the board and wrote one more sentence in white chalk. "Justice doesn't need a badge, only courage." The words stood out boldly against the blackboard like a message meant for an entire generation. The students read it aloud together, their young voices ringing out like a vow being etched into memory. The sentence was simple, yet it carried everything the story of Maya had left behind: the strength of truth, the resolve of one person, and the ripple effect touching millions of hearts. Outside the window, birds chirped in the morning sunlight, an ordinary scene filled with quiet meaning. The class looked up at the board. Some quickly copied the sentence into their notebooks, while others sat still deep in thought. To them, it wasn't just a moral lesson, but a key to understanding that justice is always within reach if one has the courage to grasp it. The mix of soft laughter and silence created a classroom atmosphere every teacher dreams of, the atmosphere of realization. The lesson ended, but the words continued to echo. The children burst into the schoolyard chatting excitedly about Maya, about truth, and about courage. Some promised to tell the story to their families. Others said they wanted to draw the image of the woman standing tall before the gun. The teacher stood by the window quietly watching, smiling as she saw belief being passed on, because she knew that the seed of justice planted today would one day grow strong, and when the children grew up, that belief would help them defend the truth. That final message didn't just close a story. It opened a long journey ahead where justice would always be upheld, not by a badge, but by the courage of those who dare to stand tall against injustice. The story of Maya Johnson closes not just as a sequence of shocking events, but as a journey affirming the power of truth and courage. From the moment the gun was pointed at her head in a crowded supermarket to the final thunderous applause at the medal ceremony, everything formed a powerful current exposing the dark corners while igniting faith across the community. Maya did not win through force, nor did she rely on superficial authority. She won by standing calmly in the face of injustice, holding on to her belief in honor and justice. That alone allowed her journey to go beyond a courtroom trial, becoming a story for society repeated again and again as a symbol of its time. The public did not forget the image of communities marching in the streets, students turning classrooms into forums of debate, or veterans standing together in defense of honor. Each of those acts proved that justice does not belong to a single person, but is the result of collective effort. When small voices unite, when hands are raised together, even the most entrenched systems of power must bow. And through that process, Maya became a guiding flag, inspiring people with the belief that personal courage can turn into collective strength and create lasting change. What made the story remarkable was not the final sentence given to Turner, but the way society refused to let the incident fade like a passing headline. They turned outrage into movement video clips, into reminders, slogans, into ways of life. That response showed that justice must be nurtured daily, protected from many sides so that no one can defile a person's dignity and walk away in silence. The mural, "Justice Needs Courage," the fundraising events, the songs echoing through the square, all stood as proof that truth does not vanish in darkness, as it can light new hope when shared and defended. The deepest lesson from this journey is the power of voice. When Maya said, "I'm not afraid of the gun, I'm afraid of silence," she wasn't just stating her own belief, she was speaking for millions who have been forced to bow their heads. Silence, in the face of injustice, is a dangerous compromise, while speaking out, even in a small voice, can create a powerful echo. That courage allowed Maya to preserve her honor, and at the same time gave the community the strength to put their own. It is also a reminder to younger generations that each person can contribute to justice, starting with the choice not to turn away from the truth. Maya's story also teaches that honor is a value that cannot be taken away if we know how to hold on to it. Turner lost everything, not just because of his abuse of power, but because he lost the trust and respect of society. In contrast, Maya received a medal and earned admiration not because of her rank, but because she proved that courage and determination have power far beyond any badge. This is proof that honor does not lie in material things or titles, but in actions and the belief in what is right. For the community, the story affirms that justice is not only carried out in courtrooms, it is built in classrooms, in public squares, and in everyday conversations. When students chanted slogans, when a child innocently asked why Maya wasn't afraid of the gun, when a whole class read aloud, "Justice doesn't need a badge, only courage." Justice had already moved beyond legal boundaries, becoming a moral value passed from one generation to the next. That is the most enduring power because it is not confined to a moment in time, but continues to spread into the future. This ending is not a closure, but the beginning of a new path where people believe more in the power of truth, where younger generations learn that bravery can change society, and where ordinary individuals realize they too can stand tall in the face of injustice. Maya Johnson became a symbol, but more importantly, she delivered a message that anyone can become a symbol if they dare to live by the truth. And that is the greatest legacy. Justice does not come from a badge, but from the steadfast heart and courage of human beings.